has everyone got a thing of water? And then also it's really handy to have a paper towel. Basically, the way that I like built up this picture is I actually didn't sketch it at all when I did it originally. I just started painting in using this technique called wet on wet, which is a really good technique for starting off a painting, because if we apply water like straight to the page and then paint into that, it basically means that the paint comes on a lot fainter. And so I find it really good with watercolor, like it's easy to go in too strong. So I always try to start off really faint and light so that basically everything you're adding is getting a bit darker. And that way you can sort of avoid not doing something really drastic that you can't really take away. Because I think that's what some people struggle with, like starting watercolor. It can be a bit like you go in too heavy and then you almost like can't go back on yourself. Well, I'll teach you some ways that you can go back on yourself a bit, but we want to start light and then build up with darker bits of color. And so the first step is literally just getting your big brush and painting all over the surface of the paper. And really you just want it to be glistening wet. So it kind of, yeah, just I'm gonna fully coat my whole piece of paper. And yeah, I want it to have a nice sheen so that it does stay wet for like a decent amount of time. So if you can see my picture, you can sort of see underneath these like darker colors, I've got these oranges, browny oranges that sort of are like over most of the picture. I've got it like in the arms and like not really on the face, but like basically all on the body. And that's what I want to start to paint in. So I'm going to start by just doing a really faint orange. And I basically use my palette lid just to mix the paint. And I'm going to get a bit of orange and a bit of brown and then a lot of water, because I just want it to be really faint so that like anything I do, I'm putting it on nice and faintly, so that if I make a mistake, I can just sort of, well, it won't be too hard to get rid of. So I've made quite like a nice orange there, just a mixture of like brown and orange. And basically, obviously you've got your face already, but I'm just going to start painting in just like sort of my main shapes, my arms around the face, and just leaving out the kind of main face bit. But yeah, just, and you'll see like, because I've got it really wet and I've added this, I've watered it down, it is really faint, and you want it to be nice and faint. So if it's looking too dark and it's, or the paint isn't really bleeding out, like, can you see how that's, it sort of merges out when I put it onto the page? So that's what you're aiming for, just so that it is a really like nice faint beginnings of this picture. You can also just think a little bit about how you place the paint down. So like here, I've put some like just big strokes just to suggest like a bit of fur, like kind of splaying in the wind or something. So that one's quite nice, just to like, just put a, yeah, you can start bringing in like just a few key lines as well, like in the picture. But really this is very much like just your beginnings, and it's very much the underlayer, so you don't need to worry too much about it being too accurate. If you want to make your orange a bit more yellowy, you can sort of just add in a bit of yellow just to make it a bit more kind of golden in parts. and just try and paint around the mouth. You're going to come in with more details on the face in a bit. Just focus on the body and try and start to maybe get that shape of the mouth, like the sort of orange covering going around it, sort of thing. And if you find that your paper is drying quite quickly, mine is, just add another wash of clean water to whatever area you want to just like paint a bit more into. But to mix up the green, if you just take the paler green on your palette, which is quite bright, and then add a bit of brown and a bit of blue. I use the light blue, just makes this sort of, I'm just going to put a little bit in this corner. Well, this, just a bit of green. And you'll notice like it might start to merge with the brown a bit, I mean with the orangey bit. And I just think that's where, because it's still quite watered down and subtle, like it looks really nice. It can just sort of, the watercolor can start to do its own thing a bit. And then for the top bit, this more grey blue, just add a bit of brown and a bit of the blue. Make the dark blue, this sort of ultramarine one that's, so there's the purple. I've made my palette all messy, but yours should be quite clean. They're quite like nice grey colour, nice and watered down, so it's really faint. I'm just going to add a bit of that into the top corner, just to sort of start to like show the show a bit of the background and maybe like suggest the top of the head. I've got like just a really faint drawing really. And yeah, I haven't come in with too many harsh details, or well, not really any. I've just got like a little bit of variation, a bit of orange and yellow coming in, but I'm just keeping it really, really faint. And it's just a really nice, like kind of beginning of the painting. You'll find that your page is starting to dry a little bit more, but it should still be kind of damp. And basically my next phase is to just bring in some more variety of colors, like mainly really through these reds and purples that I have going on in this picture. So I've kind of got like a lot of purpley hair. And then I've also got like quite a lot of reds like coming in here, and then sort of some like in between colors, which is basically where I've just mixed like various, because you've always got the colors that you've already got on your palette, which you can add to, or you can make new ones. And I like to have a mixture of different colors in my pictures. So I basically, yeah, it's very much a process of layering, I find, and like, as the page dries, you can get more detail. So we're just kind of going in with some more kind of pinks and reds. Basically, this red that we have in the palette is quite a pinky red. So in order to make, well, it's kind of ideal mixed with a little bit of orange for this like really bright pinky red that I have going on in the original piece. So I've just mixed two of them together and made, yeah, it's quite like a slightly pinky red, and just add a bit of water so it's, again, not too harsh, but it doesn't need to be quite so faint this time, because you've now sort of got your map down of the orangutan. So you can now start to like think about, okay, I'm gonna like bring in a bit more like decisive marks. And basically I'm just going to start, yeah, putting in this red. Now you'll see that on my page, like my page is quite dry because it's not really merging out that much. And you'll find that like bits of your page are more dry than others in this stage. And if they are a little bit, they're just coming on and they're just sitting on the page rather than kind of blurring into it, I would just add a little bit of water but try not to add loads. I'm just gonna get my page a bit more wet, just so that I don't really want to, well, I want it to like mix with the other colors that are already there. I don't want it to kind of really stand out too much. Yeah, so I just really wet my page and then just put in some really striking marks, but because it's wet, it then blurs out. Adding a bit of brown, you can then start to bring in some of these just slightly darker areas that are sort of like on the head, but really try and keep the face just pretty white, because that's where we really want to bring in the kind of a bit of texture. So yeah, I'm now going to mix up my purple, and using this, we do actually have a purple in the palette, which you can have a little play with, but I quite like this dark blue ultramarine color. And I'm just going to get a bit of that and mix it in with my red that I've already made. And that makes quite a nice deep, almost, yeah, like a reddy purple. And I might add a little bit more red to it, just so that, because it's quite like a pinky purple, I would say. And then I'm just gonna start going in. Now, your page will now be sort of like half wet, half dry. And that's quite nice, because it means that you can just sort of, oh, I'm actually gonna use my small brush now, because we are gonna be painting in like more of the details of the hair and like bringing in a few little details. But yeah, basically I started off with it quite wet. So you don't want it to be sort of super harsh. So if it, just try and make sure it's a little bit damp. But I then started to paint in the tufts of hair. And also when I was putting in these layers of hair, like just try not to only go around the top of the head. Like you can see on here, I have brought some onto the forehead, and that just stops it being, it will show that it's a bit more like circular. Well, no, 3D, yeah, because I didn't want to just suggest that it only had hair coming off like the back of its head. I wanted it to feel like it was coming off all parts of its forehead. And yeah, because it's still probably a little bit wet, you can, it's still quite forgiving. Like if you kind of do a harsh line, mine's still quite, you know, it's not too harsh, it's not too in your face. And I also started to just bring in a bit of line work. You can sort of like vary the color by adding a little bit more red, adding a bit more blue, like for different parts, but I wanted to make the eyes quite dark, so I added a bit more blue to my purple when I put in the eyes. But make sure when you put in the eyes that your page is completely dry, because you don't want the paint to blur out at all. Like you want it to be really contained. And when you paint in the eyes, just try to leave a little bit of white on the page, just so that it keeps that little glisten. And you can also water your paint down just a little bit, so it's not quite so dark, and just bring in, use your really small brush just to like really lightly bring in the nostrils and with a very thin line, the little smiley mouth. And you might realize when you've brought in these features that you need to make a little bit of an adjustment to the mouth. So I've made my mouth much too big. So I'm now gonna go back with my red and just sort of neaten that up a bit. And I'm also gonna add a bit of brown to my purple to make quite like It's sort of like a color that isn't really, it's neither here nor there. It's just a sort of browny, purpley kind of mid-tone color. That's going to be like a color that we're going to bring in the line of the body with, but also do another layer over the top of our constantly drying bit, like forehead. Because with this, I mean, you'll see that there's loads of colors in this tufty hair bit, and that was because I just went over and over with different layers. And you can get your bigger brush and bring in some of this color just to like suggest a bit more shadow around the bottom of the face and on the arms. I call this technique dry brush, whereas when we've been painting onto wet paper, the paint is very like sort of spills out and creates this very faint out, kind of ghostly outline. When you paint onto dry paper, it creates a very like distinct, sharp line. But you'll notice that if you get, if you just on your spare piece of paper, like try doing a few different lines on your piece of paper, the more lines you do, the less paint, the less water is actually on your brush, and you'll find that your brush, well, your line will start to pick up the texture of the paper beneath. So, and that's what I call dry brush, because it means that you start to get the texture showing through. But that's kind of a really useful technique for when you want to go in with a little bit of texture onto an already painted in base layer. On the forehead, see, I've used this texture, and then over the top of some of these reds that we've got under the chin. I'd sort of used it like a little bit on this arm, but really it's the forehead and under the chin that I wanted to just kind of suggest a little bit of texture. But I basically just use sort of a bit of my leftover red mixed with a tiny bit of brown, and very gently started to just bring in some texture. And when I did the forehead, I really, really wanted it to be extremely dry. And sometimes I find that just drying my brush actually on a bit of tissue paper, and then very gently brushing it on, you can sort of get that very light texture. Yeah, it suddenly starts to come alive, I think, when you add this texture. Have multiple colors sort of layering over one another. And I think it's a really good way of, it's just suggesting fur, or, you know, when you look at a orangutan, like there's kind of that shimmery feeling of the light catching off each individual hair. I've put that literally just on here and on here, and I already think like suddenly my picture's really coming together. So basically, like the final step is just sort of bringing in any colors that you might want to add. So like, for example, like you can kind of see that I've got some more blues going on in parts of the hair. And I did even put like a little splash of blue, like underneath the mouth. I'm gonna basically mix up my really deep reddy purple again, which is literally just that nice dark blue, red and brown. And I now want to sort of go in with really trying to get like quite a like thick paint that will hold its own on the page to get in these sort of darker tufts of hair. So I'm adding quite a lot, whereas like in the first few steps, we were really watering the paint down so that it was really, really faint. I don't want it to be so watered down anymore. So make sure that you do like the color that you mix up, because the less watered down it is, the sort of more strong it will be when you put it on the page. And because we've got all these like initial, well, we've got our kind of map done now, so we can be more decisive with and darker with the colors that we put on. So yeah, this is basically my next layer of my hair. And I'm basically going to go in over the top of my hair and just really like start to just be quite decisive. And you'll find that because the pages are a lot more dry, like when you put the line down, it will be much more crisp. And you can also like just vary how you actually, which part of the brush you apply the paint with. So if you and you can get some really nice different marks with that. So if you do like the tip of the brush, it creates this really nice fine thin line, but then you can make quite a thick line by just using the sort of side of the brush more. For me, a successful picture has loads of different marks in it. So when I put some of this dark red on the arms of my orangutan, I'm gonna use it more flat, or I might even use my big brush. Then I basically wanted to bring in some more colors, even more color. There's never too much color in my eyes, anyway. And I basically decided to bring in a bit of blue and a bit of yellow around the eyes. And hopefully this will make it a bit less startled, because I wanted to give a feeling of those wrinkles that you always see in their eyes. They're very kind of expressive. And yeah, so basically I mixed up a slightly muddy yellow. So to make that, I just got my yellow from the palette, and I just mixed it up with a bit of my leftover kind of brown that I have in my palette. I mean, I actually didn't even need to add anything there because my palette is so messy now, but it just makes it a little bit of a muddied yellow. And I didn't want it to be too bright. I didn't want it to stand out too much. And then I basically just used that to, with my small brush, just to paint in those just little rings around the eyes. And then I basically wanted to do the same with some blue. This is kind of, yeah, just I thought like we've got a lot of warm colors, so I wanted to bring in a bit more blue to kind of finish it off as such. So I actually used this lighter blue that we haven't really used yet, cerulean, which is quite a powerful color. So I added a bit of dark blue and a bit of red, very small amount of red, just to make a quite nondescript blue. It's kind of a bit, it's almost purpley, I suppose. But I basically just brought that into the bridge of the nose, just to, in the middle of the mouth. And I also did a little bit of blue over the mouth. And I also brought in a little hint of blue, just like around in some of the area, like bits where the white was showing through. I wanted to just have a gleam of blue showing. And I also had a little bit in the tufts of hair. I've still got to go in with some, just bring in like more of the colors that I've used already, just to sort of build up certain areas. Like this feels quite empty. So I clearly just didn't add enough of my like browns and oranges at the beginning. But, you know, I've got like all those details around the face. I think I really like bringing it together. And really, it's just a matter of like, when you kind of get to this stage, just looking at which bits maybe are lacking, reacting to what's already there, adding to it. It's very much a process of just layer upon layer. And then, but you will find that it does sort of start to come together.